Okay, so this one's quite interesting because we really wanted to see what PlayStation 5 Pro would do with Alan Wake 2 in the wake of, so to speak, in the wake of the PC version, which is very, very scalable. Well, certainly in the upwards direction. However, in the presentation, we had 6 or 7 seconds of footage. Yeah. But that is 420 frames.
Yeah, wow.
Let's talk about this, Alex. I mean, what were we seeing here?
Yeah.
What were the performance targets, first of all? Because obviously the PlayStation 5 version has a 30 and 60 FPS mode. So what were we looking at in our 400 odd frames?
Well, here I think we're seeing the 2 modes.
What, within the space
oddly
of 6
enough,
seconds?
or maybe that we don't know,
Okay.
but I presume they're 2 modes based upon the fact that the one footage was really obviously running at 60. That's Alan in the tunnels of New York as a flare goes off. And then the footage of Saga fighting, I don't remember, it's one of the, images from Alan's, waking imagination in a water area. That one was really obviously 30 FPS. And there was differences in you just look at them, one looked higher res than the other. And I thought this was also really easy to count. So that's kind of a thing, a PSSR thing at the moment. We're not having big trouble
mercifully
counting this, even though Alan Wake is that's good for us. But Alan Wake is a really dark game. And I could count even that Saga shot, where she moves, and I could count the side of her Glock, or the side of her jacket too, with Alan Wake, typical the scene with Alan Wake where he's in the sewers. A thing that reconstruction techniques don't tend to do very well is something that's perfectly emissive. Typically, the edges on that show the internal resolution in games, and that was perfectly countable. It was just a straight internal resolution line. So there I got around 864p internally at that moment in Alan Wake 2 in the 60 FPS section. And it was 1260-ish or so in the Saga section. That line was a little bit not as long, so you couldn't get it such a precise value. But so it looks like some 2 different modes, one has a much higher internal resolution than the other. That's interesting. It's also somewhat similar to what we saw with the base Alan Wake 2 on PlayStation 5.
Right. Which was using
60 FPS
FSR2 in both cases.
Which is using FSR2. This, I presume this is not using FSR2. It's really dark footage, so it's kind of hard to tell, but I presume it's using PSSR just because why show it off otherwise?
Yeah. Well, the other thing, of course, is that FSR2 was probably the most impactful thing to image quality in the base PlayStation 5 game. It wasn't great, was it?
No, it wasn't. A lot of reasons for that. The lens barrel distortion, the serious amount of foliage in the game, the rapid change from light to dark constantly, something that also FSR doesn't like a lot. But one thing to note about the 30 FPS footage is that I don't know what they could port over to PlayStation 5 Pro. The options on PC for ray tracing are very expensive because they're uncompromising, is the way I would describe them. A lot of games would be oh, it's quarter resolution. Oh, we don't reflect all the objects. These are typical optimization compromises that people use for games, and especially console games with RT. But the ones on PC were not like that at all. They was just reflect everything, reflect all levels of roughness. It was very intense. So, but as I say that, when Saga pans her gun over the background detail there while aiming at this creature, there aren't any SSR artifacts.
Right.
So
is that
could mean something. That could mean nothing.
That's the 60 FPS clip, though, right?
No, that's the 30 FPS
right,
clip.
okay.
The 60 FPS clip has actually obvious SSR in it because the way it looks, first of all, but also it bends with the screen space information there. Like when the frame buffer is distorted, it bends the SSR with it, and it's like that's not the way reflections work. So you can tell that something isn't right there. But the Saga footage could potentially have some level of ray traced reflections, based upon my experience with the PC version, where usually a Saga's arm getting in the way of something reflective on the floor would make a huge line in it. So I don't know, but I think it's cool because we've only talked about first party stuff so far, and third party is where maybe PlayStation 5 Pro is more interesting.
Yes, absolutely. Because
it'll clean up image quality there and will potentially allow for effects that were seen in PC versions of the games. So I'm excited about that, more so than T-Loop running at a higher res, actually.
Okay, yeah. Oliver,
sorry.
Oliver, 6 to 7 seconds of footage. Any notes?
Oh man, it's so brief. I completely agree with Alex there. I think that Alan Wake 2 has a little bit of a messy SSR resolve, and it kind of doesn't look too great sometimes on console. So for sure, when you look at that 30 FPS footage, I was thinking the same thing with the way that Saga's gun is getting in the way. For sure that would cause some issues with the SSR there, and you would see some huge breakup, and there isn't like a really accurate cube map reflection usually in Alan Wake 2 to fall back on to preserve that reflective detail. So I'd certainly think that's the case. I do think I did take a look at Alan Wake 2 on console back in the day, and I think that title's image quality was probably its worst aspect. Obviously, you'd like to see more ray tracing featured in that title, but for sure the FSR2 resolve was pretty rough. In the quality mode, it was pretty okay at a normal viewing distance, but for sure in that performance mode, you're looking at like 874p resolution up to 1440p. It was just super rough, especially on like a lot of the fine details in that game. A lot of the foliage, it's just super messy. So for sure, I think expecting like the full path trace experience for Alan Wake 2 is probably a little bit too much for PlayStation 5 Pro, based off of the more moderate ray tracing upgrades that we are seeing in that console's hardware spec. But it is good to see some improvements, possibly the addition of one ray tracing effect at least, and probably a much nicer version of Alan Wake 2 to actually look at in motion.
Okay, so just to sort of summarize here, we're thinking 30 FPS mode gets a ray tracing upgrade, possibly. Performance mode probably gets a quality upgrade in some respect, because the resolutions are very, very similar to the base PlayStation 5. So,
very similar,
essentially, they're diverting GPU horsepower to more effects, and then or quality of pixels, if you like, and then using PSSR to overall improve image quality. So that's a really interesting choice from a third party, assuming our analysis of 6 to 7 seconds.
One thing to think about as well is that in that quality mode, because they're already doing FSR 2 to 4K, putting PSSR in there should not really be too much of an ask, presuming they are trying to hit that same 4K resolution. Whereas in the performance mode, if they're doing the same thing that a lot of other developers are doing and exploiting it to really push that performance mode up to 4K resolution, maybe they're not going to have as much GPU time left over for other things, because
That's interesting.
Right.
Yeah, they are taking
or CPU time.
That GPU cost is basically eaten up by that enormous 4K upsample from a much lower base resolution, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, this is a title, when it does come out, I'm gonna be very interested in comparing it to PC, because if I recall, the performance mode also had like the lower quality shadows, which was another kind of like sticking point. There was also the fact that there was an option on PC that allowed you to change like the perhaps where in the pipeline post-processing was done. So you could get like low-res post-processing with upscaling or high-res post-processing with upscaling. There was an option for that on PC, and I'm curious to see where for example, this more 4K looking, the 30 FPS version that we're seeing here, I'm curious to see where it lies in those settings, because like we saw with Ratchet and Clank, it looked like the post-processing there was still like low resolution. So I'm curious to see whether or not Sony mandates, almost like DLSS is mandated, even though not everyone follows it, to use high-res post-processing. I'm just curious. Okay. I have no idea.
Well, based on the quality, on the performance hit that inflicted on the PC version, I'd suspect it's not a great fit for any console.